Okay, picture the ultimate superpower marriage. I mean, an alliance so massive, so ideologically locked in, that it literally terrified the West. Now, imagine that exact same marriage ending not just in some bitter diplomatic spat, but with two nuclear-armed giants pointing their weapons directly at each other. So how exactly does the ultimate communist alliance turn into a very real threat of global nuclear war?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tearing into the anatomy of a truly spectacular breakup, the Sino-Soviet Split. You know, this wasn't just your standard disagreement over policy. This was a massive geopolitical divorce driven by clashing egos, deep-seated paranoia, and intense ideological rivalry. It completely shattered the whole myth of a unified communist bloc and honestly changed the entire trajectory of the Cold War. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for the breakup. 1. The broken brotherhood. 2. Clashing egos and ideologies. 3. A timeline of betrayals. 4. Paranoia and purges. 5. The brink of war. And finally, number 6, the strategic triangle.
Starting off with Section 1, the broken brotherhood, the red banner torn.
To really get the split, we first have to look at the honeymoon phase, right? Under Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong broadly accepted Soviet primacy. That red banner of Sino-Soviet unity was the ultimate symbol of socialist power. And yeah, it genuinely terrified Western powers. But beneath the surface, the foundations were actually surprisingly fragile. And this perfectly highlights the core debate historians have about why this alliance fell apart. On one hand, you've got the ideological view, both Chinese and Soviet leaders retrospectively blaming the other for betraying true Marxism. From that perspective, the split is just a massive ideological failure. But then you have the realist view. That perspective argues Marxism actually had nothing to do with it, and that the USSR and China were simply two massive great powers with completely different national interests and security fears. And as we're going to see, the truth is this fascinating, tangled mix of both.
Moving to Section 2, clashing egos and ideologies, first fiddle versus radicalism.
The cracks in the foundation really started to show when we look at the incredibly volatile personality clash between Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev and Chinese chairman Mao Zedong. The clash of egos here was just intense. Nikita Khrushchev literally told Fidel Castro in 1963 that the quarrel was fundamentally about egos. He said, "They want to play the first fiddle." Khrushchev had this high-handed, almost paternalistic arrogance about him. He firmly believed the USSR was the natural chief of the communist world. In his mind, inequality was perfectly natural, and Moscow was simply meant to lead.
But Mao Zedong fiercely rejected this. I mean, Mao literally promised the Soviet leadership that his ideological struggle would continue for 10,000 years. He possessed this unyielding radicalism. Remember, he was deeply shaped by China's century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers, and he absolutely refused to let China play junior partner to some Soviet father party.
So the absolutely crucial point here is how Mao framed this defiance. He completely weaponized the concept of revisionism. This was basically Mao's accusation that Khrushchev and the Soviet leadership had just straight up abandoned true Marxism-Leninism. Because Khrushchev was pushing for peaceful coexistence with the capitalist West and, had denounced Stalin's harsher methods, Mao argued the Soviets were actually trying to restore capitalism. This was the ultimate ideological insult to undermine Soviet legitimacy.
All right, Section 3, a timeline of betrayals, the downward spiral.
So ideology and egos set the stage, right? But it was a series of tangible, honestly sometimes pretty petty foreign policy blunders that rapidly dissolved their alliance in the real world. Let's just rapid fire through these. In 1958, Mao kicked off the Taiwan Strait crisis without even consulting Moscow, which deeply frustrated the Soviets. Then, in 1959, Khrushchev abruptly canceled a secret deal to provide China with a prototype atomic bomb. By 1960, in a massive fit of rage, Khrushchev suddenly withdrew thousands of Soviet technical experts from China, completely crippling Chinese industrial projects. And then, the kicker. In 1962, when Khrushchev pulled missiles out of Cuba to avoid global war, Mao publicly accused him of cowardly capitulation. To Mao, the Soviets were proving to be completely unreliable.
And even after Khrushchev was ousted from power in 1964, any attempts to mend fences just spectacularly failed, sometimes in genuinely shocking ways. Get this, at a Kremlin reception in November 1964, a visibly drunk Soviet defense minister, Rodion Malinovsky, actually approached the Chinese delegation and suggested they just get rid of Mao Zedong, exactly like the Soviets had gotten rid of Khrushchev. As you can probably guess, the Chinese delegation was completely outraged. It really just shows how little diplomatic respect was actually left at that point. Which brings us to Section 4, Paranoia and purges, the enemy within.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that the international tension didn't just stay at the border. It profoundly fueled domestic chaos inside China. Just look at the dynamic between Chairman Mao and Deng Xiaoping. Mao became intensely paranoid that there were Khrushchevs inside China, party leaders who secretly wanted to overthrow him and implement those Soviet-style revisionist policies. Deng Xiaoping was actually one of the top leaders Mao feared was taking the capitalist road. Basically, Mao felt his absolute authority and the revolution itself were under direct threat from within his own ranks.
So, to combat this perceived internal threat, Mao took some truly drastic steps which directly catalyzed the great proletarian cultural revolution. Step 1, he manufactured a massive domestic struggle against revisionism. Step 2, he purged his highest-ranking party rivals, like head of state Liu Shaoqi, and entirely sidelined Deng Xiaoping. And Step 3, he unleashed millions of radicalized youths, the Red Guards, into these chaotic, violent rallies. The Sino-Soviet split was literally the direct ideological fuel for one of China's most devastating domestic upheavals. Next up, Section 5, the brink of war, from empty words to bullets.
While China was completely engulfed in the Cultural Revolution, the ideological insults flying back and forth with Moscow were about to turn into a terrifying physical military threat. In 1964, Mao told a visiting delegation that Tsarist Russia had unfairly taken vast territories from China, literally stating, "We have not yet presented the bill for this list." Now, Mao later admitted to a foreign visitor that this was really just him firing empty cannons to make them nervous. But let me tell you, the Soviet leadership, who were already deeply insecure about defending their vast, underpopulated eastern borders, did not find it funny at all. They took it as a literal, imminent threat of expansionism. It's a pretty stark reminder of how easily geopolitical bluffs can be misread.
And that paranoia directly led to bloodshed. In response to a massive Soviet military buildup along the border, the Chinese adopted a strategy of active defense. In March 1969, Chinese troops ambushed a Soviet patrol near Zhenjibo Island on the Ussuri River, and the Soviets retaliated heavily. Scores of soldiers were killed. For a few utterly terrifying months in 1969, you had two nuclear-armed communist states actively shooting at each other. The Soviet Union even made veiled threats about a preemptive nuclear strike. World War III felt entirely possible.
To pull back from total catastrophe, Soviet Premier Kosygin and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai held this frantic, incredibly tense meeting right at the Beijing airport in September 1969. Miraculously, they managed to assure each other that neither side actually wanted a full-scale war. So the bombs were stopped, but the trust, completely gone. That meeting just solidified an icy, highly militarized deep freeze in their relations that would literally last for decades.
And finally, Section 6, the strategic triangle, realigning the world.
Let's look at the big picture here and move to the resolution phase, because this massive geopolitical divorce had absolutely staggering consequences. First off, it permanently fragmented international communism, spawning all these rival pro-Soviet and pro-Maoist movements all over the globe. Second, it left China deeply isolated diplomatically and profoundly terrified of a Soviet invasion. And third, well, that exact fear created a massive, totally unprecedented diplomatic opening for the United States. Which brings us to the ultimate historical irony of the whole split. And this really matters, because it fundamentally shaped the triangular superpower dynamics that we still feel echoes of today. The extreme ideological fervor that caused the breakup in the first place effectively forced both nations to play pure, unfiltered power politics. Suddenly, China is pointing its weapons at its supposed Marxist brothers while desperately making backdoor deals with its ultimate capitalist enemy, the United States. Driven by that shared Soviet threat, Mao actually welcomed Richard Nixon to Beijing in 1972, which fundamentally altered the global balance of power and, effectively, kicked off the end of the Cold War.
So that leaves us with this final, kind of provocative thought. We so often hear that the West won the Cold War, right? But looking at the sheer destruction caused by the Sino-Soviet split, the clashing egos, the bitter ideological purges, the border wars, you really have to ask yourself, did the Cold War end because of the strategic brilliance of the West? Or did it end because the East fundamentally and spectacularly divided itself? Keep that in mind as you explore more about this absolutely fascinating era.